The night air in Toronto trembled with the low sounds of the double bass. The October chill made passers-by quicken their pace, but inside the Blue Note Jazz Club, it was warm, heated by hundreds of bodies, whiskey, and music. Ezekiel Fremont first stepped into this place 13 years ago. He wasn't alone. He was with his business partner, Leland Donovan, a thin man with an attentive gaze. At the time, their auto parts business was just starting to turn a profit. "You have to hear this," Leland said, leading Ezekiel through the crowd to the small stage. "My wife is performing a new program tonight." Ezekiel wanted to refuse. Music had never been his thing. He agreed to come only because Leland hinted at the possibility of meeting a potential investor. But when Zara Donovan stepped onto the stage in a dark gold dress, everything changed. Her voice was low with a slight husk, enveloping like the smoke from an expensive cigar. She sang of lost love, of longing, of hope, and Ezekiel, a man who had never believed in love at first sight, felt the ground slip away beneath his feet. "Amazing, isn't it?" Leland whispered proudly, not noticing the change in his partner's face. "Yes," was all Ezekiel could say, his eyes fixed on the woman on stage. 13 years have passed since that evening. Ezekiel stood at the window of his study, looking out at the autumn garden. Behind him, on the wall, hung a photograph of him and Zara at their wedding. She was wearing a simple white dress, a soft smile on her face, and he was in a formal suit, with an expression of restrained triumph. The photograph had been taken a year after Leland's death. A car accident. The brakes failed on a mountain road. Leland was returning from a business meeting late at night. The car skidded off the winding road and plunged more than 100 meters. His body was found only 2 days later. By that time, Ezekiel was already with Zara, supporting her, helping to organize the funeral, dealing with paperwork. Ezekiel sighed, pushing the memories away. He had other things to worry about now. Nisha, Zara, and Leland's daughter was getting married in 3 days. The wedding had to be perfect. He had put a lot of effort into making this day special. Ezekiel had always had mixed feelings about Nisha. The older she got, the more she resembled her father, not in appearance, but in her gaze, her manner of speaking, her stubbornness. And like her father, she had never fully accepted Ezekiel. The office door opened and Zara entered. She had changed in 13 years. The girl with the burning eyes was gone, replaced by an elegant woman with a soft voice and a constant hint of sadness in her eyes. "You're awake," she said, approaching her husband. "It's almost midnight. The decorators are coming tomorrow. We need to make sure everything is done right." Zara smiled and put her hand on his shoulder. "You're so excited. It's like it's your wedding. I want everything to be perfect for Nishi. She appreciates your efforts. It's just, she has a hard time showing it." Ezekiel just nodded, not wanting to argue. They rarely talked about the strained relationship between him and Nisha. Ezekiel had done everything to give her a decent life. He paid for the best education, helped her get her first job at a prestigious law firm, and always supported her financially. But despite this, Nisha always kept her distance, as if there was an invisible wall between them. "Go to bed." Zara kissed him on the cheek. "Tomorrow will be a difficult day." When his wife left, Ezekiel stood by the window for a while. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk, took out a bottle of bourbon, and poured himself a glass. The alcohol burned his throat, but it couldn't drown out his growing anxiety. The morning brought sunshine and bustle. The large Fremont mansion was filled with people, florists, decorators, caterers. Ezekiel, impeccably dressed as always in a dark blue suit, was supervising every detail. "Mr. Fremont," said the woman in charge of the decorations, approaching him, "we wanted to confirm the location of the arch for the ceremony. In the garden or on the terrace?" "In the garden, by the old maple tree. That's where my stepdaughter wanted it." The woman nodded and walked away, making notes on her tablet. Ezekiel glanced at his watch. Nisha should be arriving any minute now from her morning dress fitting. As if in response to his thoughts, the front door opened and Nisha entered the hall accompanied by her fiancé, DeAndre Holt. Seeing them together always made Ezekiel feel uneasy. It wasn't that he disliked DeAndre, The architect was polite, well-educated, and seemed to genuinely love Nisha. Something else troubled Ezekiel when he looked at the tall man with his attentive gaze. "Ezekiel," Nisha nodded to her stepfather. She never called him father. "I see you've started directing the parade. I just want everything to go perfectly." Nisha was beautiful. There was no denying it. Tall, slender, with a proud bearing and clear eyes. Once, when she was 15, he had tried to be her friend, taking her to baseball games, teaching her to drive, even trying to take an interest in her hobbies. But she had always remained politely distant, accepting his concern but never opening up in return. "Is Mom home?" Nisha asked. "In the conservatory, picking flowers for arrangements." Nisha nodded and headed there, leaving DeAndre with Ezekiel. An awkward pause ensued. "How's your documentary project coming along?" Ezekiel asked to fill the silence. DeAndre was not only an architect, but also a documentary filmmaker who made films about old buildings in Toronto. That was how he had met Nisha. He was interviewing her about the legal aspects of preserving historical heritage. "Very good," DeAndre smiled. "But right now, Nisha and I are working on a new project. More personal." "What is it about?" "Nisha didn't tell you?" DeAndre's voice betrayed his surprise. "She's decided to make a documentary about her father, about Leland." Ezekiel felt a chill run down his spine. "Really?" He tried to keep his voice normal. "What exactly does she want to say?" "His story, his life, his work, and of course the circumstances of his death. Nisha believes that the official investigation into the car accident left some questions unanswered." DeAndre didn't have time to continue. One of the staff approached them with a question about the table arrangements. The conversation was interrupted, but Ezekiel's unease only grew. By some strange coincidence, Nisha had decided to dig into the past right now, before her wedding, 13 years after her father's death. Ezekiel remembered the night when everything changed. 6 months had passed since his first meeting with Zara at the jazz club. 6 months of agonizing obsession. He came to every one of her performances, always sitting by the wall, hoping that Leland wouldn't notice him. Sometimes he invited Leland and Zara to dinner, enjoying brief moments with her, trying to catch her eye, her smile. She was polite, but nothing more. That evening, Ezekiel was sitting in his workshop. Leland had to drive to an important meeting with a potential investor in a neighboring town along a mountain road. His car was in the workshop. Leland had asked Ezekiel to check it before the trip, and then he made a decision. Corbin Reeves, his best mechanic, a man in his 40s who was always ready to earn some extra money, approached him. "Everything's checked, boss. The car's in great shape." Ezekiel looked at the silver sedan and thought about Zara, about what would happen if Leland disappeared. "Corbin," he said quietly, "how much is your silence worth?" "I don't understand what you're talking about." 5,000, cash, right now." Ezekiel looked him in the eye. "You'll make sure the brakes fail on the mountain road, not right away, about an hour after you start driving." Corbin didn't answer. He didn't express surprise or outrage. He just remained silent, and Ezekiel knew he had named the right amount. "Another 5 when it's done," he added. Corbin nodded and headed for his car. Ezekiel returned to the present when he heard Nisha's voice coming from the conservatory. "DeAndre, did you tell Ezekiel about our project?" "Yes, but we've only just started talking." Nisha turned to her stepfather. "I hope you don't mind. After all, you knew my father better than most." "Of course not." Ezekiel smiled stiffly. "I'll be happy to help. Leland was a good man." "He was," Nisha nodded. "I plan to interview you and see the site of the accident. You remember exactly where it happened, don't you?" "Of course," Ezekiel replied, feeling his heart begin to beat faster. "But why now? You must have a lot of other things to worry about before the wedding." Nisha shrugged. "A wedding is a time to think about family, about the past and the future. I think it's the right moment." Ezekiel thought he saw a challenge in her eyes. It was as if she knew or suspected something. But that was impossible. In 13 years, no one had ever questioned the accident. Besides, DeAndre added, Nisha found some interesting archive material. Photos from the accident site, police reports. "Really?" Ezekiel felt his mouth go dry. And where did you find them? In the police archives, Nisha smiled. The advantage of being a lawyer is that I have access to such things. I also contacted a journalist who wrote about the accident. He kept his notes. Ezekiel nodded, trying to remain calm. Well, that's interesting, but I'm not sure you'll find anything new. Everything was thoroughly investigated. Maybe, Nisha looked at him intently, but sometimes what seems obvious isn't actually so. Come on, DeAndre. We have to meet with the wedding planner in an hour. When they left, Ezekiel felt a cold sweat run down his back. Something in Nisha's eyes, in her words, made him think that this wasn't just a documentary project. It was as if she was looking for something, as if she knew something. Nisha sat at the table in her temporary room in the Fremont's house. Although she had been living separately for over 10 years, Ezekiel had always kept a room for her, a spacious one with windows overlooking the garden. Many of her childhood and teenage belongings were still there. Nisha had returned a week before the wedding to be closer to the ceremony venue and help with the preparations. On the table in front of her was an old box labeled Dad. She kept everything related to Leland here: photos, letters, newspaper clippings, including the article about his death. Nisha had read the article many times, but only now, 13 years later, did she begin to notice inconsistencies. She laid out the photos from the accident scene that she had obtained from the police archives. Her father's car had been almost completely destroyed after falling from a height of over 100 meters. But in one of the close-up photos, the brake system was visible. Something about this photo bothered her. There was a quiet knock at the door. It was DeAndre. "May I come in?" he asked, peeking into the room. "Of course," Nisha smiled. "Take a look at this." DeAndre walked over to the table and glanced at the photos. "What exactly do you see here?" he asked. "The report says that the brakes failed due to wear on the brake line, but look here," she pointed to the photo. "See this cut? It's too smooth for natural wear. It looks more like someone cut the tube." DeAndre looked closely at the photo. "You're right, it does look suspicious, but it's been 13 years. Even if you're right, it'll be hard to prove anything." "I found someone who can help," Nisha said. "Corbin Reeves. He was the head mechanic at Ezekiel's and my father's garage. He was the one who prepared my father's car for that trip." "You think he might have been involved?" "I don't know, but he can definitely tell us what happened to the car before the accident. I've arranged to meet him today." "Do you want me to go with you?" Nisha shook her head. "It's better if I talk to him alone. Besides, Mom asked you to help her choose some wines for the reception." DeAndre smiled. "Zara acts like it's extremely important, but I suspect she just wants to get to know her future son-in-law better." "She's worried about me," Nisha said, gathering the photos. "I'll be back soon. Don't tell anyone where I went." "Do you think Ezekiel will suspect anything?" "I don't know, but I feel like he's already tense because of our documentary project. It's better not to give him any reason to worry." Although in reality that was exactly what Nisha wanted, for Ezekiel to start getting nervous. Over the years, she had tried many times to talk to her mother about her stepfather's strange behavior, about how quickly he had entered their lives after her father's death. But Zara always dismissed her concerns as teenage angst. Only now, when Nisha had gathered enough information, did she decide to take action. Corbin Reeves lived in a dilapidated apartment building in the northern part of Toronto. The years had not been kind to him. The former mechanic had become a sick man with a sallow face and trembling hands. When he opened the door, Nisha did not recognize him at first. "Mr. Reeves? I'm Nisha Donovan." He looked at her blankly for a second, then his eyes widened. "My goodness, little Nisha. Leland's daughter? Come in." The apartment was small and unkempt. Medicine bottles lay on the tables and dust was everywhere. "Sorry about the mess," Corbin said, motioning her to the couch. "My health isn't what it used to be." "What's wrong with you?" Nisha asked. "Liver cancer. Terminal stage. The doctors say I have a few months left." Nisha hadn't expected such a revelation right after saying hello. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," Corbin smiled weakly. "I haven't lived the most virtuous life. Now I'm paying for it. But you're surely not here to listen to an old man's complaints. How can I help you?" Nisha took out the photos and placed them on the table. "I want to talk about the accident that killed my father." Corbin stared at the photos for a long time without touching them. Then he sighed heavily. I've been waiting for this conversation for many years. I thought you would never come. Did you know I would ask? I had my guesses. You were always a smart girl, and very much like your father. He never left a question unanswered either. Corbin rose from his chair and shuffled over to the dresser. From the bottom drawer, he took out a small box. Here, he said, handing it to Nisha. This is what you're looking for. Nisha opened the box. Inside was a piece of metal tubing, part of a brake system. This is, she began. Apart from your father's car, Corbin finished. A brake line, see this cut? I made it. Ezekiel ordered me to. Nisha felt the blood drain from her face. She had suspected it, but to hear it like this, so bluntly. Are you confessing to murder? Her voice sounded strange, as if it were coming from far away. Yes, Corbin lowered his head. Ezekiel paid me $10,000 to damage the brakes. The cut was made so that the tube wouldn't rupture immediately but would leak gradually. By the time your father reached the mountain road, almost all the brake fluid had leaked out. But why did you agree to do it? Money. Stupidity. I didn't think I was agreeing to murder. Ezekiel said he just wanted to scare Leland. He said it would be controlled, that Leland would get away with minor injuries at worst. I wanted to believe that. Nisha was silent, staring at the fateful piece in her hands. Why did Ezekiel want to kill my father? Because of your mother. He was obsessed with her. When Zara performed at the Blue Note, Ezekiel came to every concert. Sometimes he just sat in his car across from your house. Leland didn't know about it, but I saw him. It was an unhealthy obsession. Nisha closed her eyes, trying to process what she had heard. For 13 years, she had lived under the same roof as her father's killer, with the man who had destroyed her family for his own desires. Why didn't you go to the police? Fear. Money. Corbin took a deep breath. Ezekiel paid me to keep quiet. First monthly, then once a year. The last payment was 5 years ago. I think he decided the danger had passed. And this detail? Why did you keep it? Insurance, in case Ezekiel decided I was dangerous. And I guess deep down I knew you'd come looking for answers someday. I wanted proof, a chance to atone for my guilt in some small way. Corbin coughed and took a handkerchief from his pocket. There were drops of blood on the white fabric. Now that I'm going to die soon anyway, there's no point in keeping it a secret. I hope it helps you find justice. Nisha carefully placed the item back in the box and closed it. Can I take this? Of course. That's why I kept it all these years. Nisha stood up, feeling a strange emptiness inside. Everything seemed unreal. Thank you for telling me the truth. Don't thank me. Corbin smiled sadly. I should have done this 13 years ago. Maybe then. He didn't finish his sentence. Stepping outside, Nisha got into her car but didn't start the engine. She needed time to process what she had heard, to decide what to do next. She had proof. She could go to the police right now. But what would happen to her mother? How would she cope with the news that the man she had trusted for 13 years had killed her first husband? Nisha took out her phone and called DeAndre. How did it go? He asked. I was right, she replied simply. Ezekiel paid Corbin to tamper with the brakes. I have proof, a part with signs of tampering. There was silence on the other end of the line. What are you going to do? DeAndre finally asked. I don't know yet. I need to think. Meet me at home, and I'll tell you everything. Meanwhile, Ezekiel sat in his office, nervously tapping his fingers on the desk. Corbin hadn't answered his calls for 2 days. This was unusual. The former mechanic usually picked up the phone immediately when he saw Ezekiel's number, afraid of missing an important call, as he called it. The office door opened and Zara entered. You missed lunch, she said with concern. Did something happen? No, just work, Ezekiel tried to smile. Lots to do before the wedding. Zara came over and put her hand on his shoulder. You've been acting strange lately. You're nervous, you're not sleeping well. I heard you walking around the house in the middle of the night. Everything's fine, really, he said, covering her hand with his. I just want everything to be perfect. For Nisha. It's not just because of the wedding, Zara said, moving away from him toward the window. It's because of her project on Leland, isn't it? Ezekiel froze. Why do you think that? I've seen how you've changed since Nisha told me about it. You've always avoided talking about Leland. Even after all these years, you still don't like to hear his name. That's not true. Ezekiel. Zara turned to him. I know you've always been jealous of my memories of him, but he's part of my life. Part of Nisha's life. You can't just erase that. Ezekiel felt anger rising inside him. She was talking about Leland as if he were still between them, as if he still mattered. I never tried to erase him, he lied. It's been so long. Sometimes you have to let the past be the past. Zara sighed. For Nishi, it's not just the past, it's her father. She wants to understand what happened to him. It's natural. What if she finds something she doesn't expect? The words slipped out before Ezekiel could stop himself. What do you mean? Nothing, he quickly corrected himself. It's just that sometimes the truth can be painful. What if she discovers that Leland wasn't as perfect as she remembers him? Zara looked at her husband for a long time, then said quietly, You're acting strange, Ezekiel, and it's starting to worry me. When she left, Ezekiel dialed Corbin's number again. Voicemail. He felt like the situation was spiraling out of control. He had to find Corbin and remind him of the consequences if he dared say anything he shouldn't. But he was even more concerned about Nisha. What exactly had she found out? How far had she gotten in her investigation? Ezekiel decided he had to find out for himself. He knew his stepdaughter had left a few hours ago. Going upstairs, he quietly entered her room. He felt awkward. He had never invaded her personal space before. But now it was a matter of his life, his freedom. The room was neat, almost sterile. A laptop lay on the table. Ezekiel's first impulse was to turn it on, but he stopped himself. The computer was probably password protected. Instead, he began examining the papers on the table. Under a stack of wedding brochures, he found a folder labeled LD Case. Inside were photos from the accident scene, copies of police reports, and Nisha's notes. Ezekiel flipped through them, feeling his heart beat faster. She was close, too close to the truth. The last sheet in the folder was a piece of paper with Corbin's address and a note. Meeting at 4 o'clock. The time had already passed. She was there. She had spoken with him. And if Corbin had told him... Ezekiel put everything back as it was and left the room. Thoughts raced through his mind. What if Corbin had kept some evidence? What if he had given them to Nisha? 13 years had passed, but there was no statute of limitations on murder. Going down to his study, Ezekiel poured himself a whiskey. His hands were shaking noticeably. He tried calling Corbin again. No use. The front door slammed, and Ezekiel heard Nisha's voice. She had returned. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the study door. Come in, he said, trying to make his voice sound normal. Nisha entered, holding a small box in her hands. Her face was pale but determined. We need to talk, she said. Of course. Ezekiel pointed to the chair across from his desk. Did something happen? Nisha sat down, but kept the box on her lap, not letting go. I just came from Corbin Reeves. Ezekiel felt a chill run down his spine. Corbin, the mechanic who worked in our workshop, how is he? He's dying, Nisha replied simply. Liver cancer. He has a few months left. Ezekiel couldn't hide his relief. That's sad. But why did you visit him? For my documentary. He knew my father. He worked with him. And what did he tell you? Ezekiel tried to make his voice sound casual. Nisha looked him straight in the eye. Nothing special. Memories, details. He has an amazing memory for someone on his deathbed. Something in her tone made Ezekiel wary. It was as if she was testing him, watching his reaction. I'm glad you found him. Leland worked with him a lot. Yes, Nisha nodded. Especially before that last trip, Corbin personally checked his car. Nisha stood up, still holding the box. That's all I wanted to say. Tomorrow is another day of wedding preparations. I need to get some sleep. When she left, Ezekiel leaned back in his chair, feeling sweat trickling down his forehead. What exactly had Corbin told her? And what was in that box she was holding so carefully? He tried calling Corbin again. This time, an unfamiliar female voice answered. This is Corbin Reeves's phone. "Who is this?" Ezekiel asked. "Hospice nurse. Mr. Reeves was admitted 2 hours ago in critical condition. Are you a relative?" "A family friend," Ezekiel replied automatically. "How is he?" "I'm very sorry, but Mr. Reeves passed away 20 minutes ago." "Do you know how to contact his relatives?" Ezekiel slowly lowered the phone. Corbin was dead. If he had told Nisha anything, he would never be able to testify. It had been a fortunate coincidence, perhaps the most fortunate in the last 13 years. But what if Corbin had left her not only his story, but also evidence? What could have been in that box? Ezekiel felt fear wash over him again. He couldn't sleep that night. Zara breathed quietly beside him, unaware of the thoughts tormenting her husband. Ezekiel thought about the wedding in 2 days, and then, what would happen after that? If Nishi had evidence, she could go to the police right after the honeymoon, or even sooner. In the morning, the news got even worse. At breakfast, DeAndre casually announced, "Nishi and I have decided to postpone the honeymoon for a few weeks. We have important things to do right after the wedding." "What things?" Ezekiel asked, feeling his heart sink. "Business," Nisha interjected. "I'll discuss my plans after the ceremony." Zara looked at her daughter in surprise. "But you said you were flying to the Bahamas right away." "A few changes," Nisha smiled at her mother. "Don't worry, everything's fine." But Ezekiel knew that nothing was fine. She was planning something, and perhaps that plan would go into action immediately after the wedding. If so, he had very little time to decide what to do. After breakfast, he quietly took the gun he had kept in his office safe for years in case of an emergency. Ezekiel had never thought that emergency would involve his own family. The morning of the wedding day was clear. The sun's rays pierced through the light haze, promising a warm day despite the autumn. The garden of the Fremont mansion was transformed. A white arch decorated with fresh flowers stood by an old maple tree. Rows of chairs were arranged on the perfectly manicured lawn, and garlands of flowers and silk ribbons hung everywhere. Nisha stood by the window in her room, watching the final preparations. Her ivory wedding dress was ready, hanging on a special hanger, waiting for its moment. Next to the dress, on the dressing table, lay a small box, the one Corbin had given her. Last night, DeAndre had told her about the death of the former mechanic. It wasn't a surprise, given his condition, but it still hurt. Corbin had taken part of the truth to his grave, but he had left behind the most important thing, material evidence that could shed light on the events of 13 years ago. There was a quiet knock at the door. It was Zara, elegant in a lilac dress with a pearl necklace around her neck. "Are you ready, dear?" she asked as she entered the room. "The stylist will be here in half an hour." "Yes, Mom," Nisha smiled, trying to make it look natural. "Everything's fine." Zara came over and hugged her daughter. "You look so beautiful. I'm so happy for you. DeAndre is a wonderful man." "Yes," Nisha said, pressing herself against her mother for a moment. "Mom, are you happy with Ezekiel?" Zara pulled away, looking at her daughter in surprise. What a strange question to ask on your wedding day. "I'm just thinking about my future." Nisha turned away toward the window. "I want to be sure I'm making the right choice." "Of course I'm happy." Zara walked over to the window and stood next to her daughter. "Ezekiel has always taken care of us, given us a home, a future, especially after your father." She didn't finish her sentence. "After Dad died in that accident," Nisha finished for her. "Have you ever wondered if it seemed strange how quickly Ezekiel came into our lives?" "Nisha?" Zara's voice sounded worried. "What's going on? Why are you bringing this up today?" "Nothing, Mom." Nisha turned to her and smiled. "Just pre-wedding jitters. Don't worry about it." Zara looked at her daughter intently, but didn't press the issue. "All right. If you need to talk, I'm here. Now try to relax. Today is your day." When her mother left, Nisha sat down on the edge of the bed, staring thoughtfully at the box containing the evidence. She had made her decision yesterday, after discussing everything with DeAndre. Right after the wedding, they would take the piece and Corbin's statement to the police. Even if 13 years had passed, justice had to prevail. But first, she needed to talk to Ezekiel. Give him a chance to explain himself. maybe even a chance to leave on his own without waiting to be arrested, for her mother's sake. In another wing of the house, Ezekiel was checking the contents of his safe. The gun was there, wrapped in velvet cloth. He never thought he would use it, but now everything had changed. If Nisha really had evidence and was going to use it, the life he had built over 13 years would collapse in an instant. He closed the safe and went to the window. The final preparations in the garden were being completed, and guests began to arrive. Elegant cars pulled up to the gate, and well-dressed people gathered in groups, talking quietly. Everything was perfect, just as he had planned, just as it should be. Ezekiel didn't want it to end like this. He loved Zara and cared for Nisha in his own way. For 13 years, he had been a model husband and stepfather. Should one mistake made many years ago ruin everything? There was a knock at the door, and DeAndre entered the office, already dressed in his wedding suit. "Mr. Fremont," he nodded. "The ceremony will begin in an hour. It's time to get ready." "Of course," Ezekiel smiled stiffly. "I'll be right down." When DeAndre left, Ezekiel opened the safe again and took out the gun. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he felt he had to be ready for anything. Nisha decided to talk to her stepfather before the ceremony. She hid the box with the evidence in a small clutch bag that she was going to take with her to the ceremony. She was already wearing her wedding dress, her hair was done, and her makeup was finished. There were 45 minutes left before the start. She carefully descended the stairs, trying not to attract attention. Her mother was busy with the organizers, and the guests had not yet entered the house. Nisha quietly knocked on the study door. "Come in," Ezekiel's voice came from inside. He was standing by the window, his back to the door, dressed in a dark suit. When he turned around and saw Nisha in her wedding dress, his face showed surprise. "Nisha, isn't it bad luck to see the bride before the wedding?" "I think we have more important things to worry about," Nisha said, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." Ezekiel tensed up. "Of course. What about?" Nisha walked over to the table and placed her clutch on it. Opening it, she took out the box Corbin had given her. "This," she said, opening the box and showing him the break part. "About what happened 13 years ago." Ezekiel stared at the part for a long time, then slowly looked up at his stepdaughter. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "Stop lying," Nisha said quietly but firmly. "Corbin told me everything before he died. How you paid him to damage the brakes on my father's car. How you staged an accident that looked like an accident. Corbin is dead." Ezekiel took a step toward the table. "It's his word against mine." "And this detail," Nisha pointed to the evidence, "with obvious signs of tampering. An expert will easily determine that the damage was intentional." Ezekiel sank into a chair as if his legs had given way beneath him. "Why are you doing this today? On your wedding day?" "Because I can't start a new life until I finish the old one," Nisha replied. "For 13 years I lived under the same roof as my father's murderer. Do you think I can just forget about that?" Ezekiel was silent, staring at his hands. Then, unexpectedly, he looked up. "I loved your mother. From the moment I first saw her. Leland didn't appreciate her. She was fading away beside him." "Don't you dare!" Nisha raised her voice. "Don't you dare tarnish my father's memory to justify yourself!" "It's the truth." Ezekiel shook his head. "You were too young to understand. Leland controlled her every move, every performance. He used her talent to keep his business going, to attract clients. Even if that's true," Nisha crossed her arms over her chest, "that didn't give you the right to kill him." "I wasn't going to kill him." Ezekiel stood up. "I just wanted to scare him, set up a little accident. Corbin was supposed to make the brakes fail on a flat stretch of road where Leland would just slide off the side. But he took the mountain road that night. I didn't know." Nisha stared at him silently, watching the mask of control and confidence slip from her stepfather's face, revealing fear and despair. "I loved your mother for 13 years, Ezekiel continued, his voice trembling. "I did everything to make her happy. I cared for you like my own daughter. Doesn't that mean anything?" "It does," Nisha replied quietly. "That's why I came to talk to you before the ceremony, to give you a chance to explain everything yourself. Right after the wedding, DeAndre and I will take the evidence to the police. But if you want, you can go with the confession yourself. It will be better for everyone, especially for Mom. You'll ruin her life." Ezekiel shook his head. "She loves me. It will kill her." "She'll be fine." Nisha looked away. "She'll have my support." Ezekiel looked at his stepdaughter with growing despair. "I'm begging you, don't do this. For your mother's sake, for everything we had. I'll do anything you want. I'll give you money, help you with your career. Just don't destroy our family." "Our family?" Nisha smiled bitterly. "You destroyed my family 13 years ago when you decided you could just get rid of my father and take his place. You don't deserve forgiveness." She closed the box and put it back in her clutch. "You have until tomorrow. Either you go with your confession, or we'll do it for you." Ezekiel didn't answer. His gaze was fixed somewhere in space, as if he hadn't heard her words. Nisha headed for the door, but before leaving, she turned around. "You know, I always felt that something was wrong. All these years, like a dark shadow hanging over our house. Now I know it was the truth trying to come out." When the door closed behind her, Ezekiel sat motionless for a long time. Then he slowly walked over to the safe, opened it, and took out a gun. For 13 years he had lived in fear that the truth would come out. For 13 years he had tried to atone for his sin by creating the perfect life for Zara and Nishi, and now it was all falling apart. The garden was full of guests. Musicians played softly, creating an atmosphere of joyful anticipation. The white arch by the maple tree was covered with flowers, and chairs were arranged in neat rows. Ezekiel sat in the front row next to Zara, who smiled happily as she looked at the altar where DeAndre stood waiting for his bride. "She's so beautiful today," Zara whispered to her husband. "I'm so glad Nisha has found happiness." Ezekiel nodded silently, feeling the weight of the gun in his jacket's inside pocket. He didn't know what he was going to do. Part of him still hoped that Nisha would change her mind, that this was just a cruel bluff. But deep down, he knew there was no hope. The wedding march began, and all heads turned toward the front of the aisle. Nisha walked slowly, elegant in her white dress, a bouquet of yellow roses in her hands. Her face was hidden behind a thin veil, but Ezekiel could feel her gaze on him, cold and accusatory. She approached the altar where DeAndre was waiting for her. The ceremony began. The priest spoke of love, fidelity, and the willingness to support each other in sorrow and in joy. Ezekiel listened to these words, and a storm grew inside him. For 13 years, he had been faithful to Zara. For 13 years, he had done everything to make her happy. And what did he get in return? Betrayal from the stepdaughter he had raised as his own daughter. The exchange of vows began. DeAndre took Nisha's hands in his and began to speak. "Nisha, I promise to love you with all my heart, to protect you from all harm, to be honest with you in everything. I promise to defend truth and justice no matter how bitter it may be." Ezekiel shuddered. Those words seemed directed straight at him. Defend truth and justice. They had planned everything. The wedding was just a cover for their true goal, to destroy his life. Nisha began to recite her vows, but Ezekiel could no longer hear the words. Only one question echoed in his head. Why? Why after 13 years did the secret have to be revealed now? Why did his life, his love, everything he had built, have to be destroyed? He felt his hand reach for the inside pocket of his jacket where the gun lay. "If anyone knows of any reason why these two cannot be married, speak now or forever hold your peace," the priest said the traditional phrase. Ezekiel slowly stood up. Zara looked at him in surprise. All the guests fell silent, waiting for him to speak. But instead of words, Ezekiel took out the gun. "So, one," he said, pointing the gun at Nisha and pulling the trigger. "For your father, who didn't appreciate Zara." A shot rang out. The guests screamed and panic ensued, but Ezekiel seemed oblivious. "Two," he said, firing again. "For the years I cared for you." DeAndre tried to shield Nisha, but Ezekiel continued to fire, methodically counting each shot. 3. For the night spent in fear of exposure. 4. For your education, which I paid for. 5. For the home I gave you and your mother. Zara screamed, trying to stop her husband, but he pushed her away and continued shooting. 6. For the wedding I arranged. 7. for the love you rejected. 8, for the truth you want to reveal. 9, for the betrayal you planned. The guests scattered, some trying to get to Ezekiel from behind, but he was in a trance, oblivious to his surroundings. 10, for my ruined life. 11, for what you couldn't forgive. 12, for what I can never atone for. The last shot rang out in the sudden silence. 13, 1 for each year of my secret. Ezekiel lowered the gun and looked at what he had done. Nisha lay at the altar, her white dress stained red with blood. DeAndre bent over her, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. The police arrived and arrested Ezekiel without resistance. He walked to the police car with a blank expression on his face, as if none of this concerned him. "I've waited 13 years for this to end," he said to the officer who was leading him away. "I've lived with this secret for 13 years. Zara was left alone in the empty garden, surrounded by overturned chairs and trampled flowers. Her daughter had been taken to the morgue, her husband to prison. Her whole world had collapsed in an instant. In the evening when the house was empty, she went into Ezekiel's study. She needed to understand what had happened, why the man she had loved for 13 years was capable of such a monstrous act. In the open safe, she found an old notebook. On the first page was the date of Leland's death. Zara began to read, and with each page her heart sank deeper and deeper. Ezekiel described in detail how he had planned the accident, how he had made arrangements with Corbin, how he had calmly watched her grief after her husband's death, secretly rejoicing that now she would belong only to him. The notebook fell from Zara's hands. For 13 years, she had lived with her first husband's murderer. 13 years she had shared his bed, loved him, trusted him with her life and the life of her daughter. And now, she had lost everything. Her daughter was dead, and the man she had considered her rock had turned out to be a monster. Zara went to the window and looked out at the garden where the wedding was supposed to have taken place just a few hours ago. Now this place would forever be associated with tragedy. 13 shots, 13 years of lies, 13 steps from love to hate. Somewhere deep in the garden, the wind swayed the white wedding arch, tearing the last flowers from it.